Welcome back to Classified Files, the channel that declassifies the most astonishing, untold stories of military history. We often think of war as a clash of steel and firepower, of tanks, ships, and airplanes. But beneath that visible conflict, there has always been a second, invisible war, a war of signals, of codes, and of the electromagnetic spectrum. In this shadow war, victory and defeat are measured not in miles of territory, but in decibels, frequencies, and the capture of a single flickering signal that can change everything. Tonight, we go back to a moment of supreme crisis, when a nation's survival hung by a thread and the enemy seemed to possess an almost supernatural ability to strike with pinpoint, devastating precision, even in total darkness. The conventional tools were failing. The experts were baffled. But one quiet, overlooked scientist, assigned to analyze the junk data from a new, buggy, and universally hated piece of technology, saw a pattern that everyone else had dismissed as random noise. His superiors called his theory a fantasy. His colleagues called it a career-ending obsession. But his pursuit of that failed signal led to a discovery that didn't just save his country from disaster. It fundamentally changed the future of warfare forever. This is the failed radar that saved Britain from disaster. Before we power up the transmitters, if you believe that the most critical battles are often the ones fought in secret, in laboratories and listening posts, by men and women whose names are rarely recorded, then I need you to join our intelligence network. First, hit that subscribe button and activate the notification bell. It's your clearance for all future declassified briefings. Second, hit that like button. It boosts our signal and helps these vital stories reach a wider audience. And finally, drop a comment down below. Let us know what country and city you're receiving this transmission from. Our global network of history and technology enthusiasts is our greatest asset. The year was 1940. The world was on fire. France had fallen, a staggering, catastrophic collapse that had left Britain standing utterly alone, a defiant, terrified island fortress against the seemingly invincible might of the Nazi war machine. The Battle of Britain was raging in the skies over the Channel, a desperate moment-to-moment struggle where the heroic few of the RAF, in their Spitfires and Hurricanes, were just barely holding back the daylight onslaught of the Luftwaffe. But as summer bled into autumn, the battle changed. The Germans, frustrated by the RAF's unbreakable resistance in the day, pivoted to a new, more terrifying strategy, the night blitz. The sirens began to wail over London, Coventry, Manchester, a nightly soul-crushing chorus of terror, followed by the distant crump, crump, crump of high explosives and the roar of 1,000 fires. The Luftwaffe owned the darkness. They were bombing, not just indiscriminately, but with a precision that was chilling, impossible. In total blackness, through thick cloud cover, they were hitting their targets, factories, railway junctions, docks, with a navigational accuracy that baffled Allied command. How were they doing it? The conventional wisdom was that they were simply using dead reckoning, starlight, and maps, combined with the guiding light of the fires from the first wave of bombers. This was the theory held by Air Commodore Jeffrey Watson, a man of hard-nosed, practical, old-school RAF thinking. He was a pilot's pilot, a man who believed in the Mark I eyeball, in the skill of a man, not the gimmickry of a machine. He had seen the early flawed reports from the new, experimental RDF, range and direction finding systems, what we would come to call radar, and he was deeply skeptical. He saw them as a drain on resources, a boffin's fantasy. In a damp, cramped, temporary hut at a converted coastal radar station in Swanage, Dr. Alistair Finch felt like a man shouting into a hurricane. Finch was the opposite of Watson. He was not a warrior. He was a physicist, a quiet, meticulous, painfully shy man in his late 20s, seconded from the Cavendish Laboratory at Cambridge, a man who believed in numbers, in wave propagation, in the beautiful, cold logic of the electromagnetic spectrum. He was, in Watson's dismissive terminology, a boffin, and he had been assigned a job that was considered a professional dead end. Analyzing the noise floor of a new, deeply troubled, and universally hated piece of equipment, the AI Mark IV. AI, or Airborne Interception, radar. This was the failed radar. It was a bulky, primitive, 5-meter wavelength set, consisting of a heavy transmitter, a receiver, and a complex web of antennas, all crammed into the nose and wings of a Blenheim, or the new powerful Beaufighter. It was, by all accounts, a disaster. It was heavy, robbing the fighter of precious speed and maneuverability. It was notoriously unreliable, its vacuum tubes constantly blowing under the vibration of combat, and worst of all, its user interface was a nightmare. The operator, a separate crewman crammed into a dark, claustrophobic station, stared at two small green cathode ray tube displays, one showing range, the other relative bearing. But the blip of a target was almost impossible to find, buried in a constant, swirling, chaotic snowstorm of electronic noise, static, and, most frustratingly, massive, overwhelming clutter from the ground. The night fighter pilots loathed it. It was extra weight, extra complexity, and, in their opinion, completely useless. "It's junk, Reggie," one pilot had told Finch over a bitter cup of tea, using his informal name. "Absolute bloody useless junk. I spent half the night trying to tell the difference between a Heinkel and a bloody cow in a field. Most of us just turn the bloody thing off. It's easier to use your eyes." The program was on the verge of cancellation. Air Commodore Watson was its most vocal opponent. "We are wasting precious man-hours and resources on this death ray fantasy, gentlemen." Finch had heard him boom in a high-level briefing. "This AI radar is a failure. It is too noisy, too unreliable, and it has not, to date, been responsible for a single verified kill. We must scrap this program and put these valuable men and resources back into building more searchlights and training more cat's eye pilots who can actually see in the dark." For Finch, this was a tragedy. He believed in radar, but he was just a junior physicist, assigned to the janitorial task of analyzing the noise. His job was to wade through the endless, frustrated after-action reports from the AI operators, to look at their logs of static interference and unidentified noise, and to write a report recommending better shielding, or different frequencies, or something, to make the blip clearer. It was the bottom of the barrel. So, night after night, Finch sat in his cold, damp hut, surrounded by stacks of greasy, pencil-scrawled logs. He was looking for patterns in the noise. He was a man obsessed with signal-to-noise ratios. And as he plotted the reports, a strange, impossible, electrifying pattern began to emerge. The noise, the interference the operators were complaining about wasn't random. It wasn't the fuzzy, chaotic crackle of atmospheric static. It wasn't the persistent, low-level grass of ground clutter. This was different. He isolated a series of reports from 43 Squadron. The operator, a Sergeant Davies, was a meticulous note-taker. 22:17, Davies had written, "Patrolling Sector Beta, heavy rhythmic hissing interference on 1 5-meter band, constant, swamped scope, no contacts seen." 23:05, Patrolling Gamma, hissing gone, scope clear. 23:20, re-entering Beta. Hissing returned, same bearing, same strength, had to reduce receiver gain to 0, useless. Finch's blood went cold. He pulled more reports, from different nights, different pilots, but the same sectors, over and over, when flying on specific headings, west of London, or approaching Coventry from the south. The AI radar, this failed piece of junk, was being overwhelmed by a loud, steady, directional buzzing or hissing. Finch grabbed a map of southern England and a protractor. He began to plot the bearings. He drew lines, faint pencil marks, from the patrol sectors, back towards the source of the reported noise. The lines. They weren't random. They weren't pointing all over the place. They converged. They crossed. They all pointed, with chilling mathematical precision, to one specific spot on the other side of the English Channel. A spot near Cherbourg, in occupied France. It's a beam," Finch whispered, his voice a dry croak in the silent hut. "My God, it's not noise. It's a signal. It's a radio beam, a navigation beam." His mind raced, the implications staggering, terrifying. The Germans weren't just lucky. They weren't just good navigators. They were cheating. They were riding a precise electronic highway through the sky. A beam of energy pointed directly from France to their targets in England. They weren't seeing the targets. They were just flying down this invisible electronic road, and when the signal stopped, or when a second beam from a different station crossed the first one, they just dropped their bombs. That was how they were hitting the factories, the docks. It was a system, a precise, targeted electronic bombing system. He realized with a jolt that the AI radar, the failed radar, wasn't a failure at all. It was an accidental success. Its flaw, its extreme unshielded sensitivity on the 1.5-meter band, the very thing that made it noisy and useless to the pilots, was precisely what made it the only piece of equipment in all of Britain that could hear this German beam. It was a happy, brilliant, world-changing accident. The AI radar wasn't just a poor-quality plane finder. It was a perfectly designed beam finder. He had to tell someone. He ran, his charts clutched in his hand, through the rain-soaked darkness to the office of his direct superior, Dr. Abercrombie, the head of the Swanage Research Group. Abercrombie was a cautious man, a good scientist, but a man terrified of the military brass, terrified of Air Commodore Watson, terrified of being wrong. Finch burst in, drenched, manic, his eyes wild. "Sir, I found it! I found it! The noise! It's not noise! It's a beam, a German navigation beam. They're guiding the bombers. Look." He spread his map, his data, his logs, across Abercrombie's desk. "It's all here, the bearings. They all converge. Right here, in Cherbourg. The AI radar, the one they hate, it's detecting it. We can hear them." Abercrombie stared at the map, at the frantic pencil lines, at this wild-eyed, rain-soaked junior physicist who looked like he'd just seen a ghost. He looked pitying. "Reginald," he said, his voice the smooth, placating tone one uses on a hysterical child. "Get a grip on yourself. You're overtired. You're seeing patterns in the static." "No, sir. The math is sound. The bearings are consistent over weeks of data." "It's impossible, Finch," Abercrombie snapped, his patience breaking. "You're a noise analyst, not an intelligence officer. You're telling me the Luftwaffe is so stupid they're broadcasting their attack plans on a frequency our own fighters can pick up? It's absurd. It's noise, sunspots, atmospheric ducts, a flaw in the Mark V's receiver. It is not a secret German death ray." He stood up, gathering Finch's precious papers. His map. "Your job, Dr. Finch, is to find a way to filter out this hissing, to eliminate it, so the pilots can find the bombers. Your job is not to invent conspiracy theories. This project of yours is rejected. Your findings are inconclusive. You will cease this line of inquiry immediately." He handed the papers back. "Now go get some sleep, man. You look dreadful. You've been working too hard on a failed program. Maybe I should request your transfer back to Cambridge. This war work. It's clearly not for you." He had been rejected, laughed at, dismissed as a hysterical, conspiracy-theorizing rookie. The most important intelligence discovery of the war was just noise. The thump-thump-thump of the bilge pumps was the only clock we had, a frantic, failing heartbeat in the steel veins of our dying ship. My scuttling crew, 10 men including myself, who had been deemed either too stubborn, too stupid, or too loyal to desert, were now a cabal of conspirators, trapped 150 feet beneath the surface of the Sibutu Passage, breathing air that tasted like a wet battery. We weren't hiding to survive. We were hiding to build. We had taken the S-39 down soft, a controlled, agonizingly slow descent, letting the leaks in the mangled forward torpedo room flood completely, using the compartment as a variable ballast tank, as I'd calmly explained to Salty McGraw, my chief. He just stared at me. "Sir," he'd grunted, "you're not a captain anymore. You're a goddamn lunatic. You know that, right?" But he had followed. They all had. Because the alternative, scuttling, surfacing, surrendering, was a known death. This was at least a chance. A 1 in a million, insane, glorious chance to go out with a bang. Our new home was the muddy bottom of the Channel, a black, crushing, silent purgatory. and our first job was the harvest. We had 4 pristine Mark 10 torpedoes in the aft torpedo room, 4 500-pound Torpex warheads that were our only remaining currency. Moving them was the first test of our collective madness. The air in the aft torpedo room was 120 degrees, thick as wet wool, smelling of grease and our own unwashed, terrified bodies. We didn't have the luxury of electric winches. They were too loud, their whine a potential giveaway to the Japanese destroyers we could hear. Even down here, their distant, rhythmic thump, thump, thump passing overhead like gods walking the earth. We had to do it by hand, using chain hoists and brute, grunting, whispered force. My 10 men, my misfits, performed a miracle of logistics. We unbolted the first warhead, 3 of us, Salty, myself, and a huge, quiet torpedo man named Bear Kowalski cradled the half-ton cone of gray, painted steel, our muscles screaming, sweat pouring into our eyes, every man acutely aware that a single clumsy slip, a dropped wrench, could detonate the sensitive contact fuse and vaporize us all, ending our insane project before it even began. We couldn't just carry it. The passageways of an S-boat are barely wide enough for 1 man, let alone 3 men wrestling a bomb. We had to lay it on greasy rags, rig a pulley system to the overhead pipes, and drag it, inch by agonizing inch, through the engine room, past the massive, silent diesels, the heat from the pipes scalding our skin. Then, through the control room, the torpedo brushing the delicate gyro compass, a half-ton of death sliding past the brain of the ship. Then, finally, to the forward bulkhead, the solid steel door that separated the living, breathing part of the submarine from the dead, flooded, mangled wreck of the forward torpedo room. We did this 4 times. 4 trips into hell, 4 500-pound sticks of dynamite, all now staged, lashed to the bulkhead, ready for the final phase. This next part. This was the madness. The forward torpedo room was a breached, flooded black void. The only way to plant the charges, to wire the fuse, was to go inside. We had 2 obsolete, leaking Moms-and-Lung rebreathers, simple escape rigs. Me and Sparks, the young, terrified, brilliant electrician, were the only ones who knew how to use them. Salty undogged the heavy, watertight hatch. The smell that rolled out was foul, a pressurized blast of trapped dead air and cold, oily seawater. "Sir," Salty whispered, his face pale in the dim red battle light of the passageway. "This is suicide. You go in there, you hit a jagged piece of metal. That suit tears. You'll drown in your own goddamn ship." "We're already drowned, Chief," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. I pulled the rubber mask over my face, the taste of stale chemicals filling my mouth. "We're just deciding how we go." Sparks, looking like a terrified ghost, his eyes wide above his own mask, nodded. We opened the flood valves, equalizing the pressure, then pushed the hatch open. We slipped, one after another, into the black, freezing, oil-slicked water. Inside our own submarine. It was a nightmare. A silent, zero-visibility world, lit only by the 2 grease-penciled, waterproof flashlights we carried. The water was full of floating debris, cork insulation, shattered wooden bunks, sodden paperback books. The mangled, twisted steel tubes of the torpedo launchers, the source of our original failure, were everywhere. A deadly, jagged obstacle course, and above us we could hear it, a constant, terrifying, high-pitched ping, ping, ping. A Japanese destroyer, passing overhead, hunting. His active sonar was cutting right through our hull. We froze, our bodies submerged, clinging to a bulkhead, the vibrations of the sonar shaking our bones, a physical, intimate violation. We waited, our own hearts hammering a frantic, silent rhythm against the ping until the sound faded. Then, the work. It was the worst engineering of my life. We weren't mechanics, we were deep-sea divers, working with numb, clumsy, gloved hands, in freezing, pitch-black water, our only air hissing from the rebreathers. We wrestled the 4 warheads one by one through the hatch, floating them into the flooded room. We lashed them with heavy chains, directly to the inside of the bow's pressure hull, the curved steel plate that was the very nose of the submarine. We strapped them together, A 2,000-pound concentrated forward-facing beehive of death. Sparks, his hands shaking so badly I had to steady him, began the wiring. He stripped the wires for the blasting caps underwater, using his teeth, his flashlight held in his mouth. He wired all 4 warheads in parallel to a single, heavy-gauge, waterproof cable. This was the stupid part, the crazy wire trick. He fed that cable back through the hatch, sealing the gland with half a tube of gasket compound and a prayer. He had just turned the entire, flooded, forward compartment into the warhead of the world's largest, slowest, and leakiest torpedo. Now the trigger. My horns. This was the part I couldn't do underwater. This was the part that would either get us killed or make us immortal. We had to surface. Surface? Salty hissed, his face a mask of incredulity when I explained it back in the control room, my body shaking with hypothermia. Sir, you are insane. There's a fleet up there. We surface for 1 second. They see us. We're dead. We won't be up for a second, I said, my teeth chattering. We'll be up for 10 minutes. I need to weld. We need power. The plan was madness, layered on madness. We waited until 300, the dead hour, when the patrols, we prayed, were at their laziest. We executed a soft surface, blowing just enough ballast to get the forward deck, the bow, awash, leaving the conning tower, the brain, still submerged. We were a half-drowned monster, our nose just sticking out of the water. Then, me, Salty, and Bear Kowalski, armed with a welding torch, a generator cable, and 3 salvaged 10-foot-long steel I-beams. We crawled out of the forward hatch. It was the most terrifying moment of my life. We were exposed. We were on the dark, slick, pitching deck of a submarine, in the middle of an enemy-patrolled strait, the S-39 wallowing in the swell, the hissing leaks inside the hull now a constant reminder that we were barely afloat. And I told Salty, "Light it up." "This is the stupidest goddamn thing I have ever done," Salty muttered, and he struck the arc. A brilliant, blinding blue-white fountain of sparks, a 300-degree welding torch, erupted in the pitch blackness of the South China Sea. It was a beacon. It was a flare. It was a giant, screaming, "Here we are." Sign, visible for 10 miles. My heart was in my throat. Every second. Every hiss and crackle. I expected the sudden, blinding flash of a destroyer's searchlight, the whistle of a 5-inch shell. But there was nothing. Just the sound of the wind, the waves, and Salty's frantic, desperate welding. He wasn't laying beads. He was stitching. He was tack welding the 3 I-beams to the bow, 1 in the center, 2 on either side, pointing forward, like a brutal, jagged trident. The horns of our new weapon. It took 10 minutes. 10 minutes of pure, unadulterated, sweat-drenched terror. "It's ugly, sir," Salty gasped, killing the torch, plunging us back into darkness. "But it's on." We tumbled back down the hatch, sealed it, and crash-dived, a frantic, controlled flood back to the muddy bottom. Back to safety. Back to our tomb. The final phase. Sparks. He had the trigger. He had drilled through the pressure hull next to the I-beams, an act of mortal sin for a submariner, deliberately making a new hole, and he had built my switch. It was a massive, crude, copper plate contactor, held open by heavy springs. The moment the I-beams hit a target, they would be shoved back, just 1 inch, closing the plates. Sparks now took the heavy cable from the warhead room and the cables from the main battery bus, and he made the final connection. He wired 200 pounds of Torpex to the bow of the ship, to a set of welded horns, to a simple, handmade switch. The entire submarine, all 1,000 tons of it, was now the firing pin. She's hot, sir," Sparks whispered, his face ashen, his hands visibly shaking as he backed away from the terminal. "She's armed." The 10 men of the scuttling crew looked at each other. The jokes were gone. The gallows humor was gone. The transformation was complete. We were no longer a crew. We were ammunition. We were no longer a broken submarine. We were the single most dangerous, most unconventional, most insane weapon in the entire Pacific theater. We were an assassin, and now, all we had to do was sit in the dark, in the foul, leaking air, 150 feet down, and wait for the sound of the thump, thump, thump. The sound of our target, drifting innocently, fadedly, over our heads. The arming of the S-39 was a silent, unholy sacrament. When Sparks, his face ashen and slick with sweat in the dim red battle light, whispered, "She's hot, sir. The circuit is live." A new kind of quiet descended upon the boat. It was not the silent, thrumming readiness of a warship preparing for battle. It was the absolute, breathless, grave-still silence of the tomb, of 10 men sealed inside a 100-ton bomb, their own ship now the single most dangerous object in the Pacific Ocean. The transition from scuttling crew to suicide crew was complete. Our lives were no longer measured in days, but in the agonizing, slow drip, drip, hiss of the forward bulkhead. The leaks, which we had once cursed, were now our clock, the sound of the ocean, at 150 feet, patiently, relentlessly, trying to reclaim the steel we were borrowing. And the thump, thump, thump of the bilge pumps, the only machinery still running, was the frantic, failing heartbeat of our mission. The air was the first enemy. With the diesels silent, the ventilation systems off, the CO2 scrubbers struggling, the atmosphere in the boat became a thick, toxic soup. The temperature in the control room hovered at 110 degrees, the humidity at 99%. Men's skin, pale and clammy in the red light, was slick with a constant, greasy film of sweat and condensed diesel fumes. The air tasted of battery acid, hot metal, unwashed bodies, and the ever-present coppery tang of raw fear. We were breathing our own poison, slowly suffocating in our own steel coffin. We sat on the muddy bottom of the Sibutu Passage for 2 days. 2 full 48-hour cycles of this suffocating, claustrophobic hell. We were in ultra-silent running, a state so profound it went beyond mere doctrine. We weren't just quiet, we were dead. No talking above a whisper, no unnecessary movement. Even the clink of a coffee mug, the drop of a wrench, was a potential death sentence, a sound that could be carried through the water to a listening hydrophone. We ate cold rations. We moved like ghosts. We communicated in a bastardized sign language of grease-stained hands and wide, terrified eyes. The only man allowed to make noise was Ears Malone, our sonar man. He was our god, our only window to the world. He sat at his station. His headphones clamped so tight to his head they seemed to be a part of his skull. His body rigid, his eyes closed, listening. The rest of us, we just waited. We waited in the dark, in the heat, in the stench, and we wrestled with the madness of our own decision. I was H.P. Kepler, the mad dog engineer who had dreamed this up. I found myself, in the long silent hours, staring at the forward bulkhead, the one that now held 2,000 pounds of Torpex wired to my crazy I-beam triggers. Was this genius? Or was it just a more elaborate, more arrogant form of suicide? Had I failed my crew, not by scuttling, but by giving them this insane false hope? This glorious, stupid, theatrical way to die? The psychological strain was immense. We were 10 men, trapped in a leaking, failing, 300-foot-long pipe, at the bottom of an enemy-controlled sea, armed with a weapon that had a 50% chance of detonating if we hit a hard current, and a 100% chance of killing us if it worked. We started to see ghosts. Young Sparks, the electrician who had wired the fuse, spent his time frantically, silently, checking his simple copper plate switch, his flashlight beam. Shrouded in a red rag, shaking, terrified that a stray drop of salt water, a single rogue jolt from the ship's own electrical system, would close the circuit and end us. Salty McGraw, the chief, was a man of perpetual silent motion. He drifted, like a massive, weary shark, from the engine room to the control room, his ear pressed to the hull, listening to the weep of the leaks. His hands constantly on the bilge pump throttles, nursing them, pleading with them, trying to keep them from overheating, trying to keep the ocean at bay for just one more hour. We were in a race, not just against the enemy, but against the sea itself. Salty's reports, whispered into my ear, were grim. "She's gaining, Skipper," he breathed, his voice a gravelly rasp. "The forward bulkhead is groaning. The pressure and the pumps, they're running hot. Main bearing on number 2 is starting to squeal. We got maybe 24 more hours before we're swimming in it. We gotta find something. Fast." The clock was ticking. We had one day to find a target, or our mission would fail, and we would be forced to execute the other, more final plan. Surface, try to fight it out with the useless deck gun, and go down in a blaze of futile, forgotten glory. And all the while, the hunters passed overhead. The first time, it was a sound that made my blood turn to ice. Malone. "Ears!" His eyes flew open. He didn't speak. He just held up one finger, his face ashen. He pointed. Up. And then we heard it, a faint, high-pitched, rhythmic thump, 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 moving fast. "Destroyer," Salty whispered, his lips barely moving. "Kagero class. Hunting." Then the sound that haunted every submariner's nightmares. Ping, ping, ping. The sharp, interrogating, active sonar of the Japanese destroyer, sweeping the depths. The ping was a physical blow, a hammer strike against the hull, a sound that vibrated in our teeth, in our bones. "I see you." The 10 of us froze. We stopped breathing. We were a dead object in the mud, a 1,000-ton steel coffin, praying that our broken state, our cold, dead, silent machinery, would be our camouflage. The pinging grew louder. Louder. It was almost directly overhead. The destroyer was passing right over us. Ping. So loud it made my vision swim. We waited for the click of the depth charge rail, the splash. Nothing. The pinging. Slowly. Faded. The thump-thump of his screws receded. He hadn't seen us. He was hunting a moving target, a breathing target. We were just a rock, a cold, dead, leaking rock. Our broken submarine, our failure, was the only thing that had saved us. Twice more. They passed, a pair of destroyers, on a routine patrol. Each time, the same agonizing, silent terror. Each time the ping of their sonar washing over us, inspecting us, and blessedly dismissing us. The psychological toll was shattering. We were living on a knife edge of pure distilled fear. By the third night, the air was almost unbreathable. The CO2 levels were critical. The lithium hydroxide curtains we used to scrub the air were saturated, useless. We were gasping, our breath shallow, our heads pounding, black spots dancing in our vision. The bilge pumps were screaming, a high-pitched, failing whine. Salty gave me the final report. "Skipper," he gasped, his face a deep, purplish red from the bad air. "The pumps are shot. The bearings are seizing. I give 'em maybe 6 hours, tops. And the air. We'll be unconscious before that." This was it. The end of the line. We had to surface. We had to scuttle. My insane invention, my great gamble, had failed. We had waited for a god that never came. "Prepare to surface," I whispered, my own voice hoarse, my heart a dead, heavy lump of lead. "Battle stations. Surface. We'll try to take the first one we see with the deck gun." "Skipper." Malone's voice wasn't a whisper. It was a scream. A gurgling, choked scream of pure, disbelieving joy. He was ripping his headphones off, his eyes wide, tears streaming down his face. "Skipper, listen, listen." I dived for the sonar station, grabbed the spare headset. I put it on, my hands shaking. I heard it. Not the high-pitched whine of a destroyer, not the angry ping of sonar, but a low, deep, rhythmic thump, 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 thump. a sound like a giant, slow heartbeat. A sound I had dreamed of, prayed for. It's a Maru, I breathed. A big one. A tanker. Yes! Malone sobbed, laughing. A fat one, sir. 10,000 tons, maybe more. And she's alone. I hear no escorts. I hear nothing else. Just her. Alone. Fat tanker. In the middle of the night, chugging its way right down our gullet. The gods hadn't forgotten us. They had just waited. Until the last possible second. Where is she? I snapped, the commander back, the engineer gone, replaced by the assassin. She's passing. Sir. Almost directly overhead. Malone gasped, his eyes on the dial. Range, 1,000 yards. Bearing 010. She'll be at our closest point of approach. In 3 minutes. 3 minutes. 3 minutes to move a 100-ton leaking coffin, stuck in the mud, into an intercept course. 3 minutes to turn our tomb into a torpedo. All hands, I whispered into the 1MC, my voice a low, hissing rasp that filled the dead, foul air of the boat. Battle stations. Ballast control, stand by to blow negative. Helm, stand by the motors. Sparks, stand by your goddamn switch. I looked around at the pale, gasping, shadowy faces of my crew, the misfits, the forgotten, the dead men. Their eyes were all on me, and they weren't afraid anymore. They were grinning. Johnson, I ordered the helmsman, engage motors. Dead slow, bearing 310. We are going to creep under her. We are going to become the goddamn reef she hits. The S-39, the broken, leaking ghost, groaned. The sound of mud sucking at its hull as Salty McGraw gently fed a breath of air into the tanks, lifting us from our grave. The electric motors whined, a low, almost inaudible thrum. We were moving. The world's first and last manned torpedo was on its hunt. The S-39 was no longer a boat. She was a 100-ton predator, unstuck from the mud, moving through the black, crushing water with a new terrifying purpose. My hands were on the periscope handles, but I wasn't looking. I was feeling. The hull, our thin steel skin, was the only sense we had. The air was a hot, toxic soup of CO2, battery fumes, and the stench of our own, unwashed, terrified bodies. We were gasping, our vision graying at the edges, our lungs burning. 6 hours. Salty McGraw's estimate. We had maybe 6 hours of breathable air left, and the bilge pumps were screaming a high-pitched, metallic scree of protest, a sound that told me their bearings were about to seize, that the ocean was about to win. We had 6 hours to find our prey, or we would die, suffocated and drowned in our own tomb. Then, it. Ears. Malone, our sonar man, his body rigid, his hands pressed so hard against his headphones that his knuckles were white. Gave a single choked gasp. "Skipper," he breathed, his voice a dry, ragged whisper that cut through the foul air like a knife. I hear it. Oh God, listen." I dove for the spare headset, my heart a cold, hard stone in my chest. I put it on, and I heard him. Thump, thump, thump. Not the high-frequency whine of a destroyer's turbines. Not the angry, searching ping of active sonar. This was a low, slow, booming heartbeat, the sound of a massive, slow-turning merchant ship propeller. "It's a Maru," I whispered, my voice trembling with a sudden, savage, joyful surge of adrenaline that was cleaner than any oxygen. "A big one, a tanker." "Yes, sir," Malone hissed, his eyes squeezed shut, a look of religious ecstasy on his face. Fat, slow, and alone. I hear no escorts, no high-speed screws, just him. Bearing 010, range. Maybe 2 miles and closing. He's coming right for us. He was coming for us. A single, 10-ton, unescorted Japanese tanker, filled to the brim with the aviation fuel that the Zeros in the Philippines desperately needed. A sheep wandering, fat and stupid, into a wolf's den. A wolf that was broken, leaking, and dying. But a wolf that had one last 2,000-pound bite. The desperation, the suffocating fog of failure evaporated in an instant, replaced by a cold, crystalline, lethal focus. I was no longer a failed captain. I was no longer a mad engineer. I was an assassin. "Johnson," I said, my voice a low, steady growl into the intercom, startling the helmsman. "All stop. Let him come. Salty. Stand by the ballast. I want us heavy. I want us glued to the mud. We're not a submarine anymore. We are a rock. We are the reef." "Aye, sir." Salty's voice came back, the fear gone, replaced by a grim, ready-to-work bark. I heard the hiss of the ballast tanks flooding, the S-39 settling with a soft, muddy thud onto the ocean floor. 150 feet down, a dead, steel rock covered in 200 pounds of high explosive, armed and waiting. The next 5 minutes were the longest of my life. The thump, thump, thump of the Maru's screws grew louder. It was no longer a faint, distant heartbeat. It was a drum. It was a gong. It was a sound that was coming not just through the headphones, but through the hull. The very steel of our submarine began to vibrate in sympathy, a low, resonant groan. Thump, thump, thump. It was a sound of life, of power, of the vast, oblivious, enemy world passing by just feet above our heads. "Range, 800 yards, sir," Malone whispered, his voice trembling. He's right on top of us." "Bearing, 005. He's passing." A new cold panic. Passing. He was missing us. He was slipping by, just out of reach. "No, sir," Malone hissed, anticipating my question. His stern, his screws, they're 500 yards. 400. He's right there, sir. If we go now." This was it. The one impossible chance. Not to chase him. Not to fire at him. But to ascend. To become the reef. "Johnson," I roared, my voice a thunder in the tiny, cramped control room. "All ahead flank! Helm! Hard to starboard! Bring our nose onto him!" The electric motors, silent for so long, screamed to life, a high-pitched, desperate whine, the ammeters slamming into the red. The S-39 shuddered, its tracks, its hull. Ripping free from the sucking mud with a groan of tortured steel, we were moving. Blind, a 100-ton steel projectile, aimed by sound alone. "Salty!" I screamed. "Blow all main ballast. Blow it all. Take us up." "Blowing, sir," Salty roared, yanking the chicken levers. The sound was a shriek, a deafening high-pressure scream as 300 pounds of compressed air violently emptied into the ballast tanks. The S-39 leapt. She didn't rise. She leapt. The deck slammed into our feet, a violent upward punch. The angle was insane, 30, 40, 50 degrees nose up. We were no longer a boat. We were a missile, a 100-ton missile, fired from the bottom of the sea, rocketing upwards, blind, out of control, aimed at the thundering heartbeat of the ship above us. The control room was a nightmare of chaos. Men were thrown backwards, piled against the aft bulkhead. Tools, charts, logbooks, coffee mugs, a deluge of loose gear crashed down around us. The leaks, the hundreds of tiny, weeping seams, under the sudden, violent change in pressure and the strain of the flank motors, burst. It wasn't a hiss anymore. It was a roar, as dozens of icy cold, high-pressure jets of seawater lashed the interior of the boat. The lights flickered, died, came back on, red and dim. The pumps screamed, then choked, drowned by the influx. We were dying. We were drowning, burning, and ascending, all at the same time. "Sparks!" I screamed, my voice raw, clinging to the periscope stand as the deck tried to throw me. "Stand by your switch, on my mark." Sparks, the young electrician, was a pale ghost in the red light, strapped to his own station, his hand, wrapped in an insulating rubber glove, resting on the crude, heavy, copper knife switch he had built. He wasn't just an electrician. He was the firing pin. He was the man who would complete the circuit. He was just staring at the switch, his face a mask of pure, white, religious terror, muttering a prayer. 50 feet! Johnson screamed from the floor, where he'd been thrown, his eyes glued to the depth gauge. 40 feet! 30! We're on him! The sound of the Maru's propellers was no longer a thump. It was a deafening, all-consuming, grinding thunder, a sound so loud it felt like we were already inside his engine room. The entire hull of the S-39 was vibrating violently, shaking itself to pieces. The world was just noise and vibration and the screaming of the leaks. 20 feet. I looked through the periscope, not to see, but just to be the captain. The view was a blur of green, churning water, and then darkness. A vast, black, moving shadow, the weed-slicked, riveted belly of the tanker, filling our entire world. We were under it. We were hitting it. Now, Sparks! I roared, my voice a death rattle. Now, now, now! I saw Sparks flinch, a convulsive spasm, his eyes squeezed shut. He didn't pull the switch. He fell on it, his full body weight slamming the heavy copper bar down, completing the circuit. The last thing I saw, in that final microsecond of existence, was not a flash. It was a click. The sound of the heavy relays engaging, the sound of 24 volts from the battery bus, the sound of my insane invention, my crazy wire trick working. It was the sound of 10 men, and 200 pounds of Torpex, keeping their promise. The impact itself, the physical ram, was a dull, heavy crunch, a sound of our I-beam horns biting into the Maru's thin belly plate. That wasn't the weapon. That was just the trigger, the detonation. The detonation was not a sound. It was an erasure. It was a silent, instantaneous, all-consuming, white light, a flash so bright, so powerful, it seemed to push the ocean itself away. The S-39, the men inside, Salty, Sparks, Johnson, Malone, Bear, the 2 engineers, the cook, and me. We were not killed. We were deleted. We were vaporized instantly, our atoms fused with the fireball of our own creation, a 200-pound charge of Torpex, detonating in a flooded, sealed compartment, a tamped explosion that directed its entire ungodly force upwards. The leaking, broken submarine had become a warhead. It had become the assassin. And in that final, blinding flash, it had struck its target. The click of the relay, the crunch of the I-beams, and the erasure of 200 pounds of Torpex were not 3 separate events. They were a single, unified, atomic-level instant. The S-39, in its final act, did not just detonate. It became the detonation. The 200 pounds of high explosive, confined within the already flooded, non-compressible forward torpedo room, amplified and directed by the curved steel pressure hull, became the most efficient-shaped charge in history. It was a 100-ton bullet. The force didn't just go up, it went everywhere, but up was the path of least resistance. The hull of the Kikuho Maru, the fat, oblivious tanker, was not breached. It was shattered. It was as if the ship had been suddenly, magically, lifted onto a giant, underwater anvil and struck from below by the hammer of God. The explosion didn't just hole the ship, it vaporized its spine, blasting a crater of superheated steam and pulverized steel up through the oil-filled cargo tanks, through the main deck, and 100 feet into the night air. The 10-0-ton Maru, full of fuel, erupted in a single, colossal, secondary fireball, a roiling, churning mushroom cloud of liquid fire that lit up the Subutu Passage for 50 miles, turning the pre-dawn blackness into a flickering, hellish orange day. The S-39 and its 10-man crew, Kepler, Salty, Sparks, Bear, and the 6 other forgotten misfits, were gone before the sound wave even reached the surface. They were vaporized, their atoms fused with the fire of their own creation, a perfect, self-consuming, ultimate act of defiant sacrifice. They were, in every sense, deleted. Miles away, on the bridge of the destroyer Inazuma, the very ship that had hunted the S-39 hours earlier and dismissed it as a lost contact, Captain Tamakichi was thrown from his feet, his binoculars smashing against the bulkhead, his ears ringing. He scrambled up, staring in pure, uncomprehending horror at the pillar of fire that now marked the center of his convoy. The Kikuho Maru was gone. It wasn't sinking. It wasn't burning. It had simply, in the blink of an eye, vanished, replaced by a column of fire that was now raining molten steel and flaming oil onto the other, panicked Maris. "Sonar!" Tamakichi screamed, his voice a raw shriek. "Report! Torpedoes? Where did that come from?" The sonar man's voice was a terrified squeak over the intercom. "No! No torpedoes, Captain! No engine noise! No! Nothing! Just the explosion! A geological event! It came from underneath." Underneath, Tamakichi's blood went cold. The minefield. But no mine was that powerful. No mine could vaporize a 10-0-ton ship. He had swept this channel. This was impossible. Unless... That submarine, he whispered, his mind racing back to the faint, leaking, broken contact he had given up on. The broken one. It hadn't fled. It had waited. It had done this. He grabbed the radio. His coded flash report to Truck was a masterpiece of panicked confusion. Engaged by unknown enemy weapon. Kikuho Maru vaporized by massive submerged explosion. Suspect. New type. Suicide submarine. Or contact supermine. Formation scattered. Am searching for unknown target. Request immediate air cover. Repeat. Unknown weapon. Catastrophic. Half a world away, in the deep, quiet, code-breaking bunkers of Pearl Harbor and Washington, that flash intercept, plucked from the ether by the Magic Intelligence Program, landed on the desk of Admiral Lockwood, the commander of the submarine force, Pacific Fleet, Comsub PAC. It landed at almost the exact same time as another, equally baffling report. The decoded scuttle order from Admiral Hart, authorizing the crew of the fatally damaged USS S-39 to abandon their ship, in the exact same grid coordinates as the Japanese report. Lockwood, a hard, pragmatic, brilliant submariner, stared at the two messages, his mind refusing to connect the dots. It was a logical impossibility. Fact A. The S-39, a leaking, obsolete pig boat with shattered, useless forward tubes, was ordered to be sunk by its own crew to prevent capture. Fact B. At the exact same time and place, a Japanese invasion convoy guarded by destroyers was hit by an unknown catastrophic suicide submarine weapon that vaporized a 10,000-ton tanker. The two reports could not both be true, unless... Lockwood summoned the duty officer. "Get me the file on the S-39, he growled. "Get me the crew roster, and get me her engineering officer's 201 file. A lieutenant commander. Kepler, HP. Mad Dog, Kepler. I remember that name." The file, when it arrived, was a revelation. Kepler's record was a bizarre, frustrating mix of sheer brilliance and stunning insubordination. Top of his class at Annapolis in engineering. A genius in fluid dynamics, but also a string of reprimands, unorthodox solutions, disregard for established doctrine, prone to insane engineering experiments. And then Lockwood found it, a rejected 1939 proposal submitted by Kepler to Buord, complete with wild hand-drawn schematics. The title, Proposed Conversion of S-Class Submarine for Breaching Operations, a manned, high-explosive, contact weapon. It was a proposal to do exactly what had just happened, to turn an obsolete submarine into a 100-ton crude torpedo packed with explosives and ram an enemy ship. The admirals at Buord had, of course, laughed. They had called Kepler insane, unbalanced, a danger to himself and his crews. They had buried him, exiling him to the S-39, the oldest, leakiest rust bucket in the fleet, a mad captain for a broken boat, a perfect, tragic, poetic pairing. Until now. Lockwood looked at the Japanese intercept, suicide submarine. He looked at Kepler's insane proposal. He did it, Lockwood whispered, his voice filled with a terrible, chilling awe. That crazy, magnificent bastard. He actually did it. The broken submarine, the one that was supposed to be scuttled, had just become a weapon. Kepler's madness wasn't madness at all. It was genius. It was a terrifying, new, asymmetric warfare concept, born of pure desperation and engineering fury. Kepler had taken a liability and turned it into the single most effective weapon in the Pacific, sinking a 10,000-ton tanker with a ship that was already dead. But the secret was gone. Kepler was gone. His 10 misfits were gone. His blueprints, his calculations, his crazy wire trick. It had all been vaporized, a single, brilliant flash in the darkness. The war had a new weapon, a ghost weapon, a weapon that had worked once, with catastrophic success, and that no one in the Allied High Command knew how to replicate. The Japanese were now terrified of a threat that no longer existed. And Lockwood was now haunted by the ghost of a weapon he desperately needed. The mad engineer's idea had just become the most sought-after secret of the war.